After an awkward silence, during which everyone studied the distant horizon or the tops of their shoes, Elliot stepped toward Joe, his right hand extended. "Well, good luck, Joe. It was very nice meeting you." "Same here," said Joe. "If I ever make it to the major leagues, I'll give you a call." "I'd appreciate that," said Elliot. "It's the least I can do," said Joe. "If you hadn't let us borrow your dad's car, who knows what might have happened." "All right," said Ethan. "Let's get the LVR loaded up and ready to go before the wrong people show up here." "No," said Gerard, angrily stabbing at the ground with his foot. "I'm not leaving without my dirt clods." "We've got no choice, Gerard," said Mr. Cheeseman. "I'm sorry." "You're always sorry," squeaked Steve. "And I'm sick of it." "Grrr," Pinky growled at the sock puppet. It was at that moment that Steve decided he had had just about enough of being growled at by a hairless fox terrier. "You be quiet," he squeaked, moving in closer to Pinky's snarling face for emphasis. "I'm tired of you growling at me all the time." And it was at that moment that Pinky decided she had had just about enough of that snarky one-eyed sock puppet squeaking so loudly and so closely to her face. And so she reached out with her snarling teeth and bit Steve firmly on the area that would have been reserved for his nose, if indeed he had one. Gerard screamed as Pinky tore the sock puppet from his hand. "No, Pinky, no!" At this point, Pinky was beyond listening. With her nails and teeth, she tore and ripped at the helpless sock puppet as Gerard could only watch in horror. It took mere seconds to complete her murderous act. Pinky then walked over to Gerard and gently licked his newly exposed left hand. "Get away," said Gerard angrily. "Get away from me. Look what she did. She killed Steve." Everyone was indeed looking at what remained of Steve. They were looking in shock and amazement because amid that pile of torn up yarn and thread was a small, mint green piece of paper. "Dad," said Joe, scarcely able to breathe. "I see it," said Mr. Cheeseman. He moved toward it slowly, as if any sudden movement might frighten it away. The children watched as their father lowered himself to one knee and picked up the piece of paper, which had been folded down the middle. Slowly, he unfolded the paper, and when he read what had been written on it, he broke down and sobbed, right there in the middle of that dusty lot, his tears forming mud on the ground beneath him. Without looking up, Mr. Cheeseman handed the piece of paper to Joe, who took it and studied it. "What?" said Maggie impatiently. "What does it say?" "It says," Joe began, choking back a large lump in his throat. "It says, don't be afraid. It says, don't be afraid. Be amazing." Mr. Cheeseman wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt and stood up. He reached into the back pocket and removed the other half of the mint green paper and gave it to Joe, who positioned the two halves side by side and read aloud. "When danger lurks and your heart is racing, don't be afraid, be amazing." The code, as Maggie had originally suspected, had been ciphered as a bit of wisdom from their mother and was just the kind of advice that you might expect from the woman who saw so much in them. Smiling as he hadn't in years, Mr. Cheeseman gathered his children in his arms. "You kids were amazing today. In fact, you've been amazing throughout this whole adventure, this whole ordeal. But today was something else. Gerard," Mr. Cheeseman roughed up Gerard's spiky head, "I think that was probably the most heroic use of bubblegum in the entire history of bubblegum." Gerard smiled, and Mr. Cheeseman turned to Maggie. "And Maggie, those archery lessons turned out to be the best money I ever spent. That was a heck of a shot. But how did you... I saw you from the back window of the car. Incredible shot. Absolutely incredible." It was Maggie's turn to smile, and Mr. Cheeseman smiled back and then put his hand on Joe's shoulder. "Joe." "Yes, Dad." "That was, without a doubt, the best getaway driving I have ever seen." "Thanks," said Joe, feeling like a real man of action. "It was nothing, really." "It was something. Your mother would have been very proud of you three." Gerard cleared his throat. Mr. Cheeseman looked down at his youngest child, then followed the boy's gaze to the ragged tatters of yarn that had once been Steve, lying in the dirt. Sorry, Gerard. You're right. Mr. Cheeseman crouched down next to Gerard and gently scooped up what was left of the one-eyed sock puppet into his hands. Your friend Steve gave his life today to save that of another. Your mother would have been very proud of you all. You mean she will be proud of us, said Joe, holding the two pieces of paper together. Yes, said Mr. Cheeseman with a quiet smile. She will be very proud of you. Some quick advice for success in life. Don't be afraid. Be amazing. Chapter 24. According to Gerard, it was Steve's wish that in the event of his demise, he be cremated, his ashes scattered in the wind, and recommitted to the earth. And so, as his surviving friends and relatives gathered in the warehouse parking lot near the old black school bus, Captain Jibby volunteered to say a few words. As the captain of a seafaring vessel, I am fully authorized to perform weddings, funerals, and minor surgery. He flipped open the knife on his Swiss Army hand for effect. I thought you were the captain of a school bus, said Maggie. Yes, I suppose I am, he said, snapping the knife back. But I was once the captain of a ship, a very long time ago. I don't mean to be insensitive, said Mr. Cheeseman, but I think we need to do this quickly. We've really got to get moving. And I need to get my dad's car home before he freaks out, said Elliot. Right then, on with it. Jibby bowed his head, and the others did likewise. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to honor a great soul. Steve was a sock of strong fiber and great bravery. A sock who died in the service of friends and family, for which there is no more noble a cause. May he rest in peace, and may his spirit live on in our hearts forever. Jibby nodded to Dizzy, who struck a match, and lit the small pile of twigs and dry grass on which they lay the deceased. He then turned and nodded to Juanita, who walked forward and handed him his fiddle. Jibby placed the instrument beneath his bright, overgrown chin and began to play a sad but beautiful melody. Slowly the flames grew and consumed Steve's remains. As the fire finally died out, so did the music, leaving nothing to the ear but the wind whistling through the tall grass and the gentle sniffing of noses. That was beautiful, said Mr. Cheeseman with a sniff of his own. I call it Requiem for a Sock Puppet. Thank you for everything. I wish there was some way we could repay you for all you've done. Actually, now that you mention it, there is a favor I'd like to ask you. Anything, said Mr. Cheeseman. Anything at all. I was wondering if you might give us a ride. A ride? But you've got your bus and... No, I mean I was wondering if you might give us a ride in the time machine. For a moment, Mr. Cheeseman was at a complete loss for words. You mean the dime machine? Joe interrupted quickly. No, I mean the time machine. We've known about it for for some time. Okay, said Mr. Cheeseman, willing to drop the charade. Who are you then? CIA? KGB? Actually, said Three-Eyed Jake, we're privateers. What's a privateer? Asked Gerard. A privateer, said Mr. Cheeseman in a very serious tone, is a pirate. Upon hearing this, one thing immediately crossed the minds of Joe, Maggie, and Gerard. Pirates steal things. Had it been a mistake to trust Captain Jibby? Had it been his intention all along to steal the LVR? Were his hearty laugh and pleasing personality merely a facade? Deep down, were he and his friends no better than Plexiwave and its agents of evil? You're pirates? Said Elliot with a roll of his eyes. Pardon my skepticism, but everybody knows there are no pirates around here. True enough, said Three-Eyed Jake, taking a step in Elliot's direction. But we're not from around here. Elliot took a step back and suddenly wished he had kept his thoughts to himself. Well, said Gerard, if you're not from around here, where are you from? Three-eyed Jake turned to Captain Jibby, looking for permission to answer the question. Jibby nodded ever so slightly, and Jake went on. We're from a place very far away, a little place called 1668. This wasn't much of an answer, as far as Mr. Cheeseman and his children were concerned. This answer only resulted in more questions. 1668, Gerard repeated. Which street? No, lad, it's not an address. It's a time. The year 1668. That's where we're from. As the words left his mouth, a tension seemed to leave Jibby's body. It appeared that keeping that bit of information a secret had been weighing on him for some time. I don't understand, said Maggie, considering the possibility that Jibby was either lying or completely insane. If you're from 1668, how did you end up here? It's all part of the curse, said Three-Eyed Jake in an intense, whispery kind of voice. The curse of the white gold chalice. What's a chalice? Asked Gerard. It's a cup, said Maggie. I beg your pardon, young lady, but the white gold chalice is more than just a cup. For centuries it was used by Danish kings and is said to have been passed down from the mighty hand of Odin himself. Okay, said Mr. Cheeseman, desperately wanting to believe. But that doesn't explain how you all ended up here. Oh, but it does. It explains everything. Because the white gold chalice, you see, is said to carry a terrible curse that afflicts anyone who wrongfully possesses it, which in this case would be us. Jibby untied a small leather pouch attached to his belt. From the pouch, he removed what looked like a trophy, the kind that might be presented to the winner of a horse race, or a golf tournament, or maybe a pie-eating contest. It was a cup, silver in color, with a fluted lip and strange symbols molded along its base. So then you stole it, said Joe. Foolish, I know, said Jibby, looking somewhat ashamed. It should be noted that shame is not an emotion one normally associates with pirates. This, along with the fact that Pinky was curled up at Jibby's feet, helped put Mr. Cheeseman at ease. Stealing is never a good idea, Jibby continued, looking at his reflection in the polished surface of the cup. Neither is tempting fate, for no sooner had we taken the chalice than a hellish storm circled around our ship. The mighty Bella Juanita was struck by lightning no fewer than a dozen times. You were struck by lightning? Gasped Maggie. Aye, said Jibby with an involuntary shudder. Three-Eyed Jake and the rest of Jibby's crew also shuddered. Does it hurt to get struck by lightning? Gerard asked. Well, it doesn't help, said Jibby, the smile now returning to his face. So that's how you ended up here? Asked Joe, every bit as skeptical as his friend Elliot, but too polite to come right out with it. It would seem to be the case. Transported through time on a wickedly powerful bolt of electricity. Joe turned to his father. Dad, is that even possible? Scientifically speaking, electromagnetic kinesis has never been ruled out as a possibility. So it certainly could be true. Oh, it's true, all right. Or my name isn't Gentleman Jibby Lodbrok. This bit of information caused Joe to look at Maggie and then both of them to look at their father. Lodbrok? Said Ethan. That was my wife's maiden name. Olivia, said Jibby. She would be our great-great-great-great-granddaughter. If I'm not mistaken. Our? Said Maggie. Juanita and me. Say hello to your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. Juanita moved to her husband's side, and he placed his non-Swiss Army hand on her shoulder. You mean, Gerard began excitedly, that we're the dentists of pirates? I think you mean we're the descendants of pirates, Maggie corrected her brother. Ex-pirates, Jibby corrected Maggie. We're giving up on our thieving ways once and for all, which wasn't easy. After all, it's in my blood. My own roots can be traced back to Ragnar Lodbrok, the great Viking raider of the 8th century. Wait a minute, said Gerard. You mean we're the descendants of pirates and Vikings? I don't believe it. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. Everyone laughed, which made Gerard quite pleased with himself, as it's not always easy to make grown-ups laugh. Pardon me for saying so, Jibby, said Ethan, but the whole thing sounds quite fantastic. Yes, it does. And so does a machine that resembles a disco ball that can travel through time. But I believe with every bone in my body that it's also true, because my good man Aristotle saw it in a vision, and that led us to you, or you to us. And I believe you folks are the only ones who can help us get back in time to that fateful day in 1668, before we stole the chalice. It's the only way to break the curse that has plagued you, us, and our descendants all these years. Hold on, said Joe with annoyance. You mean all this bad stuff that's happened to us is because you stole that chalice? I'm afraid so. And for that I apologize, and I beseech your forgiveness. Joe's expression softened, and Maggie smiled. It's okay, Jibby, she said. You're our friend, and friends always forgive one another. Thank you. So what do you say, then? Will you take us with you? If we're able to lift the curse, I'm sure things will get a lot easier for you. I don't know, said Mr. Cheeseman. I'm not sure the machine's big enough for all of us. Besides, it's never been tested. It works in theory, but scientifically speaking, who knows what could happen? There's only one way to find out, said Joe. You're right, Joe. There's only one way to find out. A rumbling noise echoed through the empty warehouse as Mr. Cheeseman hoisted up the back door of the white cargo van to reveal the LVR fully assembled and awaiting entry of the computer code that he hoped would turn it from a giant oblong disco ball into a fully functioning time machine. Magnificent, said Aristotle at first sight of the LVR. Just as she appeared in my vision. She's a beauty, all right. A finer ship I've yet to see. Well, said Ethan, climbing into the cargo hold of the van. Let's see if she works as good as she looks. Do we need to take it out of the truck first? Asked Joe. It shouldn't matter, said Ethan. Either way, the first order of business is to enter the code. Should take just a second to decipher the other half. Mr. Cheeseman removed a pencil from his shirt pocket, then took the mint green piece of paper that had been hiding inside Steve. Quickly, he scribbled a number beneath each letter on the paper. When he had finished, he looked it over carefully. There, he said. That should do it. We're ready to enter the code into the computer. And Joe? Yes, Dad. I'd like to extend that honor to you. Joe suddenly felt more like an adult than he ever had before. Thanks, Dad. But don't you think... Joe nodded in the direction of his little brother. Yeah, said Maggie. I think Steve would have wanted it that way. You're right, said Mr. Cheeseman. Gerard, would you like to enter the code? The thought of being responsible for something so important made Gerard both very proud and very nervous. But what if I make a mistake? Then we'll all be blown to smithereens, said Maggie with a horrified look. Is that true, Dad? It's not true, said Mr. Cheeseman. But I feel as though we might be running out of time here, so don't make a mistake. Sorry, oh, there we go. Gerard looked at the van, not sure how he was expected to get his short body up into the cargo hold. Allow me, said Sammy, stepping forward. With one hand, he easily lifted the boy up next to his father. Thanks, Sammy, said Mr. Cheeseman. Oh, and Jibby? Aye, sir, said Jibby with a quick salute. If you don't mind, I need a screwdriver. Jibby removed his hand and, handed it to Mr. Cheeseman, who then pulled out the screwdriver and used it to remove a small panel on the side of the LVR. Beneath the panel was a keypad. I'll read out the numbers, Mr. Cheeseman said to Gerard, and you enter them here. Got it? Got it. As Mr. Cheeseman read out the numbers, each corresponding to a letter in the note. Gerard carefully punched those numbers into the computer. "That's it," said Mr. Cheeseman when the final number had been entered. "Now let's cross our fingers. See that switch, Gerard?" Next to the keypad was a small red switch. Written beneath it was the word power. "Hit it," said Mr. Cheeseman. Gerard took a deep breath and moved his fingers slowly toward the switch. Maggie and Joe could scarcely bear to watch. After all, this was it. Should the LVR fail to work, they would most likely never see their mother alive again. Jibby and his crew had their own reasons for being nervous. This was likely their only chance to break the curse that had plagued the Lodbrok bloodline for centuries. Gerard's finger reached the switch. He paused for a moment and looked at his father. "It's okay. Go ahead." Gerard flipped the switch, but nothing happened. For 2 agonizing seconds, absolutely nothing happened. And then a low hum and a greenish-blue light shot out from beneath the LVR. The frequency of the hum and the intensity of the light grew until everything and everyone in the warehouse was bathed in a rich turquoise glow. "We did it!" exclaimed Maggie. "We really did it!" Without thinking, she turned and hugged her older brother with an enormous hug. Captain Jibby hugged Juanita. Gerard hugged Ethan. Three-Eyed Jake removed his bandana and tossed it triumphantly into the air. Dizzy removed his special earmuffs and tossed them as well, and then fell over. Sammy caught him before he struck his head on the concrete floor. "I knew it would work," said Joe. "I knew it all along." Ethan looked at the LVR and nodded slowly. "It runs," he said. "Whether or not it works remains to be seen." Chapter 25 is the last chapter. "I'm sorry, but the monkey will have to wait here," said the plump young nurse. Leon watched as she pushed Pavel's wheelchair across the waiting room floor. "Don't worry, my little minky friend," the international super spy called out. "Everything will be good and also not bad." Agent Kiza followed the nurse, her sharp heels clacking across the tile floor, her purse vibrating from the shivering Agent Noodles hidden inside. Leon wished the purse were big enough for him as well, but for now, he would have to remain in the waiting room. Luckily, there was something in the waiting room that caught Leon's attention and kept him busy until Pavel returned. What would the doctor's office have? Fish tank, yeah. Much to Leon's relief, the wound to Pavel's leg turned out to be only superficial, and the doctor was able to stop the bleeding with a mere 14 stitches before sending Pavel and his friends on their way. The last anyone saw of them, they were driving toward the airport in the little brown car with Pavel at the wheel, Kiza and the shivering Chihuahua in the passenger seat, and Leon in back. "Did I not tell you, Leon?" said Pavel. "Did I not tell you that Pavel would get for you many beautiful little fishes for you to love all time?" Leon's little face lit up as he watched the mini tropical fish nip at the flakes of food floating on the surface of the enormous 50-gallon tank. "Sure, they will not have big parade for us. Maybe not write songs about us. Maybe throw us in prison for years. But you will have little fishies, and you will be making you very happy." Leon smiled and gave the box of fish food another tap. When the doctor at the clinic walked out to his waiting room at the end of the day and noticed the aquarium was missing, he immediately phoned the police. At that very moment, however, Police Chief Roy Codgill could not be bothered with such minor crimes. Along with government agents HD and LQ, he was on his way to a factory on the outskirts of town. Driving down the dusty road, the first thing he saw was a blue ragtop convertible parked on the side of the road. As he and the government agents continued to the warehouse, they saw aspiring sports agent and bass drummer Elliot Walsingham sitting on the back bumper of a black and white school bus. "Good afternoon, Coach," said Elliot as Chief Codgill climbed out of the police cruiser, agents HD and LQ right behind him. "How may I help you today?" "We're looking for your client," Chief Codgill said. "Where is he?" "I'm not sure exactly, and that's the truth." "What in heaven's name is that?" said HD, looking at the school bus. It says Captain Jibby's Traveling Circus Sideshow, said LQ. I can read, thank you, said HD. They're inside, whispered Elliot out of the corner of his mouth. Who's inside? Said Chief Codgill. The men who poisoned Joe's mother. Don't worry, they're tied up. See? Elliot reached out and pulled the door open to reveal 4 men dressed in black, their hands and legs tied tightly, just as he had reported. I'm fond of easy listening music, Mr. Five said with no prompting whatsoever. I also enjoy decorative soaps and wearing ladies' hats. What are you talking about? Demanded HD. Where's Ethan Cheeseman? And where is Joe P. Smith? Chief Codgill asked. The truth is, said Mr. Five, I don't know. But the last I saw them, they were heading toward the warehouse to the LVR. What the heck is an LVR? Said Chief Codgill. I'm afraid that's top secret, said HD. Mr. Five yelled out, The LVR is a time... HD quickly slammed the metal door closed. He's obviously suffered a severe head injury. Keep these criminals covered while we search the warehouse. Slowly, HD and LQ crept toward the warehouse, where the long black car still sat, squished, squashed, and crushed between the heavy steel doors. What are we going to do when we find them? Said HD. I'm sorry. What are we going to do when we find them? Whispered LQ. We're going to arrest them, of course, said HD. On what charge? We'll make something up later. Right now, our only concern is making sure the LVR is in control of our top secret agency within the United States government. As quietly as they could, HD and LQ climbed over the crumpled car and into the warehouse, where they found a white moving van. While HD kept his gun trained on the van's cargo door, LQ called out, his voice ricocheting off the steel walls and the concrete floor. Mr. Cheeseman, can you hear me? It's okay, you can come out now. Everything's going to be all right. We're here to help. The 2 agents waited for a moment, but nothing happened. LQ inched closer to the van, and while HD kept his gun trained on the van's cargo door, LQ slid it up, revealing what was inside, which amounted to approximately 2,000 cubic feet of oxygen and nothing else. The van was completely empty. Nowhere in the warehouse was there any sign of Ethan, Joe, Maggie, Gerard, a psychic hairless fox terrier, or any member of a certain traveling circus sideshow. It appeared that they had disappeared without a trace. In fact, without so much as a trace of a trace. Also in a state of extreme disappearedness was the LVR. It was simply nowhere in sight, for at that moment, the giant oblong disco ball was soaring along the time arc, its occupants on the way to undo what had been done. To reverse the curse of the white gold chalice, and to save the life of Olivia, Mr. Cheeseman's kind and beautiful wife, and mother to his 3 smart, attractive, polite, and relatively odor-free children. But that, my friends, is a whole nother story.